I was born black, I'll be black all my life. I don't want to hear anybody say that the Republican Party has not gone out of its way to keep people who look like me away from the ballot box, because it's painfully untrue. It is something that has been charged in the courts time after time, decade after decade, particularly across the South, where the largest concentration of black people live. So we've seen those in Georgia. We've seen it in Texas. We've seen it. Well, those states are not led by Democrats, first and foremost. I let you talk. Would you please let me finish? Thank you very much. Beyond that, we have to be very serious about the concentration and the erosion of civil rights across this country. And yes, that also proceeds with voting rights.
In today's video, Ameshia Cross unleashes on Scott Jennings on CNN's The Source. What begins as a debate on redistricting and voting rights instantly heats up when Scott Jennings takes aim, but Ameshia Cross fires back with sharp facts, historical context, and zero patience for political spin. The exchange escalates fast, and Scott Jennings' argument unravels live on air as the pressure mounts. So let's dive in and watch how Ameshia Cross shuts down Scott Jennings on CNN's The Source.
Neighboring Illinois was watching what was going to happen here. Do you think Governor Pritzker should stand down on his efforts, given these Republicans stood up to Trump?
Absolutely not. Texas didn't stand down in theirs, and courts allowed their new redrawn maps to go through. Governor Pritzker is in a different situation because at the end of the day, we've seen the aggression of Texas. We've seen the aggression of certain other states who have tried it. So at this point, there were only a handful, actually like maybe 2.5, of Democrat states that actually had the capacity to redistrict, Illinois being one of them. And absolutely, you have to fight with the game you've been entered into, not the one that you want. As somebody who has always stood for independent maps, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, what I have seen over the past few years is more and more Republicans decide that they are going to rig the game, decide that they are going to create policies that eradicate younger people for access to voting, that eradicate black people from access to voting. And at some point, there has to be a leveling of this playing field. The erosion of the Civil Rights Act, for instance, is also something that we should be paying attention to. But in absolutely no uncertain terms, Governor Pritzker is doing the right thing.
Yeah, well, and both sides are obviously guilty of redistricting at certain times. This is what's happening in a mid-decade redistricting. Texas kickstarted it, as you know, Scott. Is that something you're worried about, Scott, or that you hear from other Republicans that they're concerned about this backfiring on them?
No, not really. And I just have to respond to what was said a moment ago. No one has eradicated anyone's right to vote. In fact, it's never been easier in America to vote than it is right now. Many states, red and blue, have made it easier to vote than ever. And to hear us discussing this Indiana situation and to see a Democratic debating partner tonight cheer on Governor Pritzker and his continued redistricting, gerrymandering efforts just goes to show you that Republicans are rookies when it comes to redistricting. We are nowhere near as practiced or ruthless when it comes to redistricting as these Democrats.
What makes this interesting is how Scott Jennings treats redistricting like it exists in a vacuum, as if the political terrain has been perfectly fair and evenly enforced for both parties. That framing just doesn't hold up when you look at what's actually happened since the last census. Texas didn't just redraw maps aggressively. Federal courts found that several of those maps diluted minority voting power, yet they were allowed to stand after key protections in the Voting Rights Act were weakened. That matters because Illinois isn't reacting to theory, it's reacting to precedent. Scott also leans hard on the idea that it's never been easier to vote, but access on paper doesn't equal access in practice. Long lines in Black and Latino neighborhoods, polling place closures, limited early voting hours, and aggressive voter roll purges still hit certain communities harder than others. Studies from MIT's election lab consistently show minority voters waiting significantly longer to vote than white voters, even in states that technically offer multiple voting options. the both sides do it argument also glosses over scale and intent. Since 2010, Republican-led legislatures have controlled the redistricting process in far more states than Democrats, giving them structural advantages long before Illinois ever considered a mid-decade response. That's why national GOP leaders openly celebrated redistricting as a way to lock in power even when statewide vote totals were close or unfavorable. And calling Democrats more ruthless ignores the shift in rules. Once the Supreme Court removed federal preclearance, states with long histories of discrimination no longer needed approval before changing maps. That opened the door to aggressive tactics that Democrats simply didn't have the numbers to counter until now. So when Governor Pritzker refuses to stand down, it's not about cheering gerrymandering for sport. It's about acknowledging that unilateral disarmament doesn't protect democracy. Playing by an older, gentler rulebook while the other side rewrites the rules isn't moral high ground, it's political malpractice.
You get state after state after state where Republicans have virtually no representation in Congress at all. Illinois is already one of the most, if not the most, gerrymandered state in the nation. So, look, if this winds up being a wash, we'll have to play the hands we're dealt here. But make no mistake, gerrymandering is a Democratic skill set. Republicans are still pikers when it comes to this. But I got to tell you, what you heard tonight is what they're going to do. They're ruthless. Democrats have shut down the government. They've told the military to stop following orders. They're trying to redraw maps. This is the future with Democrats, a ruthless kind of politics, and Republicans better wake up to it.
Well, they said don't follow illegal orders. But Ameshia, do you want to respond to Scott there?
Absolutely. I was born black. I'll be black all my life. I don't want to hear anybody say that the Republican Party has not gone out of its way to keep people who look like me away from the ballot box, because it's painfully untrue. It is something that has been charged in the courts time after time, decade after decade, particularly across the South where the largest concentration of black people live. So we've seen those in Georgia. We've seen it in Texas. We've seen it. Well, those states are not led by Democrats, first and foremost. I let you talk. Would you please let me finish? Thank you very much. Beyond that, we have to be very serious about the concentration and the erosion of civil rights across this country. And yes, that also proceeds with voting rights.
What Scott Jennings is doing here is flipping reality on its head and hoping confidence fills in the gaps. Calling Republicans rookies at gerrymandering sounds clever on TV, but it collapses the moment you look at who actually benefited the most from redistricting over the last 2 decades. After the 2010 census, Republican-controlled legislatures engineered maps so effective that Democrats routinely won more total votes nationwide for the House, yet still ended up in the minority. That's not amateur hour. That's structural entrenchment. Illinois also gets singled out a lot, but that criticism conveniently ignores context. Illinois didn't start the mid-decade redistricting arms race. Texas did, Florida did, Tennessee did, and in multiple cases, courts found those maps intentionally diluted Black and Latino voting power. The difference is that once key parts of the Voting Rights Act were gutted in Shelby County v. Holder, states with long records of discrimination no longer needed federal approval before changing the rules. That legal shift overwhelmingly benefited Republican-led states, not Democrats. Scott's claim that Democrats are ruthless for telling the military not to follow illegal orders is especially telling. That's not extremism. That's literally how civilian control of the military works under the Constitution. Service members are obligated to refuse unlawful orders, and reminding them of that is not radical politics. It's basic rule of law stuff. And when it comes to voter access, the receipts are clear. Since 2013, the vast majority of voting restrictions, voter ID laws, polling place closures, limits on mail voting have come from Republican legislatures. Federal courts have repeatedly ruled that these laws disproportionately harm black voters, students, and the elderly. So when Ameshia Cross pushes back, it's not emotional overreach. It's grounded in evidence, history, and lived reality. What sounds like both sides' rhetoric from Scott Jennings ends up masking a very one-sided pattern of power protection.
The erosion of the Voting Rights Act has been done holistically by the Republican Party. What we've seen from Donald Trump is someone who wants to and continues to try to expand his power by the most illegal means. So yes, those orders were challenged. Those orders were challenged in Venezuela because, quite frankly, there was no impetus to go there to begin with. What we do know is that more than likely, this was illegal. First and foremost, that's why he's trying to hide the videos.
Okay, so a couple of things. Number one, has anyone ever personally tried to stop you from voting? Answer, no. Number two,
I vote
there are
in
no
Illinois.
illegal voters.
I don't vote in the South.
Number three in this country, I hate to remind you of our history, but it was the Democratic Party that tried to suppress black votes in this country, not the Republican Party.
And I would love to remind you that when the Jim Crow laws were eroded, they were eroded by the Democratic Party, not by Republicans who tried to hoist them up and tried to continually re-enter Jim Crow in the modern era.
I think you need to reread your civil rights history. The Democratic Party doesn't have a clean record on this, but the bottom line is Democrats are going to continue to be ruthless. They're going to continue to try to gerrymander. They're going to continue to try to say the president's delivering illegal orders to mess up our military. Who knows what they'll do in Washington from here on out.
What Scott Jennings leans on here is a very familiar argument. Take centuries of history, freeze it in the 1960s, and pretend nothing meaningful has changed since then. Yes, the Democratic Party once defended Jim Crow. That's not controversial. What is misleading is ignoring the party realignment that followed the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. After those laws passed, the voters who opposed them migrated en masse to the Republican Party, especially across the South. That's why the states still fighting voting rights protections today look nothing like the coalition that passed them in the first place. You can see that shift clearly in modern data. Since 2013, nearly every major voting restriction, strict voter ID laws, roll purges, limits on mail voting, reduced early voting, has been enacted by Republican-led legislatures. Courts have repeatedly ruled that these laws disproportionately harm black voters. North Carolina, Texas, and Arizona didn't lose cases because of partisan vibes. They lost because evidence showed racial targeting. That's not ancient history. That's the last decade. Scott's "no one personally stopped me from voting" argument also misses the point entirely. Civil rights violations aren't measured by whether one commentator had a smooth experience at the polls. They're measured systemically. Who waits longer? Who gets purged more often? Who loses polling locations and whose districts are cracked or packed to weaken their voice? On every one of those metrics, minority voters fare worse. And when it comes to Donald Trump and illegal power grabs, that's not speculative either. Courts confirmed his administration violated the Constitution over the census citizenship question. His attempts to overturn the 2020 election led to indictments, guilty pleas, and findings of unlawful conduct across multiple states. That's not Democrats crying wolf, that's the legal system doing its job. So when Ameshia Cross talks about erosion, she's pointing to a documented pattern. What Scott Jennings calls ruthless politics looks a lot more like accountability being uncomfortable for people who benefited from a tilted system for a very long time. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.